Hello, we are back with Midas Touch Legal AF and Court Accountability, processing a truly unhinged day on Capitol Hill as President-elect Trump's uh, clown car of nominees has made it up to the Hill. Yesterday, we watched Pete Hegseth before the House the Senate Armed Services Committee. Today was an onslaught. Pam Bondi for Judiciary, Senator Marco Rubio up for the State Department. And the nomination we really want to dig into that has really slid under the radar is nowhere to be found on the front page of the New York Times. The nomination we think is perhaps the most dangerous of all of them. Christian nationalist and Project 2025 architect Russ Vought to direct the Office of Management and Budget, an office connected to the White House that has serious power across huge swaths of the federal government. And Vought himself is a menace, believes that we are on the sort of verge of a Armageddon and that we are fighting a civil war effectively. And this is a person who has said that we are living in a post-constitutional time, that we are moving toward a radical constitutionalism that he is going to advance if he takes the reins of this all-important and underappreciated office. We released some important resources at Court Accountability, which we encourage you to check out. We're going to show some images and details from those here on the screen, but a profile of Vought, detailed research and investigations that Lisa and her team have been leading for over a year now. We've had our eyes on Vought because of our work on Project 2025. And then the second part of the show, we're going to dig into one of his most dangerous constitutional arguments around impoundment and dig into what that means. So, Lisa, can you give us just a bit of background on Vought himself, who this guy is, where he comes from, who he's connected to, and what he has said that makes him such a danger to our country?
Yeah, this is a guy who went to college at Wheaton College. It's a Christian university in near Chicago or in Chicago area, and then went to George Washington Law School about 2 decades ago. And has vaulted himself into a position of substantial power in the first Trump administration as the head of the Office of Management and Budget, as you mentioned, Alex, and now is nominated again to go back into that office. And he's someone who has really extreme views. Anyone who is describing this as a post-constitutional period, I don't know that we could ever trust to actually follow an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. And that's exactly what he said. I mean, it's really radical stuff. And he has, not just had sort of radical claims like the Justice Department isn't an independent agency, that it shouldn't be described as independent, notwithstanding the reforms post-Watergate to try to keep the Justice Department from just being a creature of a president to protect the president and his men from criminal prosecution. He has also used that role at the Office of Management and Budget last time, right before the 2020 election, to try to put forward an effort to basically restore from a bygone era cronyism and patronage to the federal service process by reclassifying tens of thousands of federal jobs as political jobs, including administrative secretarial jobs that they want to call political appointments so that they can reward people who are loyal to Trump, not loyal to the Constitution, so they can get around having the civil service employment process where people are hired based on their merit, their actual expertise to hold jobs, not just at the Office of Management and Budget, but across federal agencies, including, NOAA, the, Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, or other scientific posts. One of the posts that we know they targeted way back in 2020 was to even classify a toxicologist as a political appointment. We don't need political toxicologists. We need people who are actually trained and devoted to truth and science and the law in these roles. And so one of the really extreme proposals from Russell Vought was this Schedule F proposal, which we've talked about on this program briefly, but this idea that they can just replace tens of thousands of civil service jobs with unqualified loyalists whose only qualification is that they believe Trump can do no wrong and will do no wrong and they'll do whatever he says. But there's more to that, more to Russ Vought, including this really aggressive version of Christian nationalism. He's talked about trying to use OMB to limit access to the abortion medicine and more. He's talked expressly about trying to infuse Christian nationalism into our legal policy, even though the Constitution expressly forbids the establishment of religion and protects against there being any religious test or oath for office. So he is truly a dangerous person, in my view, in terms of his agenda. He certainly has a right to have those views, but whether he should have a position of substantial power, I think not. And so, that's part of what we know about Russ Vought, in addition to the groups that he's created. But let me pass it back to you, Alex, because I know you've been watching the hearings closely, and there's a lot more to say about what happened today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about the civil service, which of course was such a huge component of Project 2025, this Schedule F plan to wipe out all of these experts and civil servants and install loyalists, as you describe, in their place. And it was one of the things that Americans were so appalled by when they learned about it during the campaign season, and that Donald Trump ran away from. And it was Vought that people might recall, who over the summer of 2024 was caught on a secret tape. These sort of muckrakers from Britain posed as potential donors to his Project 2025 efforts. And he described how Trump's efforts to distance himself from Project 2025 were all window dressing, how obviously this was the plan all along, and these would be the people implementing it. And some of the things he has said about civil servants came to the fore in today's hearings. I thought the Senate Democrats here in the House government, it's the House Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, HISCAC, which is led by Ranking Member Gary Peters, did an excellent job. We had some new members of the Senate who had come over from the House, Alyssa Slotkin and Andy Kim, and Peters himself dug into this, described how Vought had previously talked about civil servants as villains. And Andy Kim, in a clip we'll show in a second, described how Vought really wants to traumatize civil servants to make them not want to show up to work. Just roll the clip and we can see some of this exchange with Vought.
In fact, you have even referred to the dedicated public employees who secure our borders, who are keeping us safe every day on the border, who are responding to emergencies and helping those who have been devastated by natural disasters, and folks who ensure that Americans get things like their Social Security checks on time, which every senior citizen needs. And you referred to these people as, quote, villains. These people who are doing this work every day, you referred to them as villains. Statements like this reflect a troubling disregard for the dedicated civil servants who work tirelessly to support our government and serve the American people. Mr. Vought, you are one of the architects of Project 2025, which sets forth a blueprint for implementing these unlawful and dangerous plans under this new administration. Leading the Office of Management and Budget is an enormous responsibility. And given your record, I have serious questions about whether you can be trusted.
Yeah.
And he's exactly right. I love to see that fire in the belly. And what I think Senator Peters is getting at is what's really at the heart of this DOGE plan. And in the Wall Street Journal op-ed that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy wrote soon after the election, they named specifically the Office of Management and Budget as effectively the implementation hub for this effort to outsource decision-making to oligarchs, to people like them, to enrich themselves further and to take away the vital government services and programs that Americans of all stripes rely on. And let's get to Andy Kim here talking about Vought's statements around traumatizing civil servants, which is part of their plan to make things so miserable for people that they will leave so that they can be replaced with cronies and loyalists. Let's roll the tape.
You said in your written testimony here, quote, "The civil servants at OMB are amongst the most resourceful and innovative I've worked with." But I've also heard you say in other circumstances, quote, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them not to want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want to put them in trauma." I raise this with you because I was a career nonpartisan civil servant. I worked in multiple departments and agencies. And I guess I just wanted to ask you why you would use a language like villains in talking about people serving our nation.
In those comments, I was referring to the bureaucracies that I believe have been weaponized, and there are portions of weaponized bureaucracies across the federal government.
Unreal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Okay, so God, that is too much. So now we want to dig into some of the substantive threats that Vought will pose if he is given this power as the head of the Office of Management and Budget, and to really help people understand just what the stakes are for our lives. Because, it's going to be hard to stop these nominations, but it is worth every ounce of effort we can muster. And it's not just blue states, red state senators. We had a colleague who told us about work she was doing with another group that focused on rehab for addiction, opiate addiction, which of course is a scourge that is affecting folks all across the country, met with a Republican senator's office. And the staff told them, and that's what this plan would do, right? They are proposing to unilaterally withhold funding that bipartisan Congresses appropriate, that is, use the power of the purse to tell the president to spend, and unilaterally withhold them from communities, from our districts and states. And these Republican staffers told this friend of ours that they really hope that they would be able to convey this damage to the Trump administration, that these Republican states would suffer, that these red states would suffer. It's like, why is that the advocacy community's job? Stand up against it and fight back. And so this impoundment threat, we released another document on this today that is making its way around the Hill and in various advocacy communities. We encourage you to check it out, about this unlawful plot to grab power at the people's expense. And the thrust of it is that Vought, through his Christian nationalist Project 2025 nonprofit group, in allegiance and partnership with Mark Paoletta, who folks might remember as Clarence Thomas's buddy from the oil painting of Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo. He's Clarence Thomas's spin man. And they put out a paper at the Center for Renewing America that flies in the face of decades and decades of precedent and centuries of practice, in arguing that the executive, the president, has inherent impoundment authority, effectively taking the power of the purse away from the president. And they purport to cite examples throughout our nation's history of presidents declining to spend money that Congress has appropriated. And there are examples of that. But in literally every one they use in their paper, they are declining to spend money that Congress has explicitly given the president discretion to withhold.
Yep.
And when the Supreme Court has reviewed these questions, including Republican justices of the Supreme Court, they have uniformly rejected this claimed inherent power. Even in the 70s, when Richard Nixon, who was probably the most famous example of a president in modern history trying to assert this kind of impoundment power, when he tried to do it, his Office of Legal Counsel attorney, William Rehnquist, who went on to be an extraordinarily right-wing, pro-business, ideological Chief Justice on the United States Supreme Court, told him it was crazy. This is nonsense. You can't do this. He bulldozed through and did it. And then the Supreme Court unilaterally shut that down, or unanimously shut that down. And just a year later, after President Nixon's assertion of that power, the Congress, on a sweeping bipartisan basis, passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, which makes clear that the president cannot do this and sets forth procedures for when the president, thinks he can save money by not spending money that Congress has appropriated, procedures for Congress to have a say in that, to go back to Congress and to basically put it up for a vote. And what Vought has proposed, and what Mark Paoletta are proposing, is that that law is unconstitutional, and that they're going to do whatever they want to knock down spending that Congress has appropriated across a range of issues. And we'll dig into some clips here too, but when they got into this today, even Rand Paul, the Republican chair of his GAC, acknowledged serious concerns with this claimed authority. And although he sort of weaseled around and said that there might be nuances to it, there are no nuances here. And just so folks have an understanding of, what the stakes are, this would, be a direct threat to major social and economic programs: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, the Affordable Care Act, it is almost impossible to walk through the full scope of what this would mean for our lives, people's lives in this country. And the senators, I thought, did a great job digging into this. Dick Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, who sits on Judiciary as well as his GAC and chairs the Veteran Affairs Committee. We don't have the Veteran Affairs clip, but that one's terrific. But he was pressing them on this constitutional precedent, and he clerked at the Supreme Court. This guy really knows his constitutional law, and he was just taken aback by this exchange. Go ahead and roll the clip.
Let me ask you, do you believe the Impoundment Control Act is constitutional?
No, I don't believe it's constitutional. The president ran on that view. That's his view, and I agree with
Have you read Train versus New York? That's the United States Supreme Court saying it is constitutional. You're saying that you're going to just defy the courts, the Office of Legal Counsel, under both administrations, including then Attorney Rehnquist, afterward becoming Supreme Court Justice, wrote for the Office of Legal Counsel. You are simply going to take the law into your own hands.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, I was going to say, like, it's just extraordinary. Sorry, but I mean, the idea that they, quote, believe it's constitutional and ran on it doesn't make it constitutional. It doesn't make it constitutional. There is statutory law. There is executive branch interpretation in the Office of Legal Counsel. There's Supreme Court rulings unanimously against them. And yet they are basically asserting that they don't have to follow it because they've decided that they don't. And as you point out, one of the people who wrote the, analysis or opinion for that is Mark Paoletta, whose job has been basically to defend Clarence Thomas and Jenny Thomas against all of the allegations and evidence of their lack of ethics. And so you have this guy who was previously at OMB with Vought in the first Trump administration, Mark Paoletta, and the two of them poised to go back to OMB, and with this emboldened idea that they can defy, they can defy Congress, they can defy the Supreme Court, they can defy what was previously the longstanding opinion, or is still the longstanding opinion of the Office of Legal Counsel. It is just extraordinarily lawless and reckless and dangerous, because then trying to undo the damage that they may try to inflict on these programs that people rely on for their health, for their income, it is just shockingly reckless. And yet he sat there at that hearing and pretended like what he was doing was perfectly reasonable because he can just opine with the help of his fellow opiner, who's part of his, out of Trump administration, revolve back into Trump administration scheme, just because they want to claim that in their heads it's not constitutional. Sorry, Alex. It's just outrageous. It's outlandish.
Yeah, I think our heads are going to be exploding a lot over the next few years here. But, and this ties directly to what we talk about usually on the show, which is the Supreme Court and this Roberts majority, which has aggressively expanded executive power as part of a decades-long project for a moment like this, perhaps. And the Trump versus United States decision is perhaps a canary in the coal mine of where they might go with this. And it's very clear that these operatives, who sort of paint themselves as outsiders, as Senator Slotkin will get into in the next clip, but who are consummate insiders in league with Clarence Thomas, in league with the billionaires that put these justices on the bench, they're counting on them. Musk and Ramaswamy, in that op-ed I mentioned in the Journal, they say it specifically. They say, we think the Supreme Court is likely to side with President Trump on this question of impoundment. And he was pressed over and over again at today's hearing about whether he would comply with the Constitution. He kept saying, I'm going to follow the law. But what he means, as you point out, Lisa, is he's going to follow his idea of what the law is, not what anybody else is, not what even this Supreme Court's articulation of the laws. Let's play this final clip and close it out.
Can you confirm for me, please, that you will abide by the Constitution and current law as it is, not what you wish it to be?
I absolutely will abide by the Constitution at all times.
And your interpretation does not, pardon the pun, trump the interpretation of the Supreme Court or at current practice on the books?
Again, administration goes through a very, very extensive policy process with the lawyers of the Department of Justice to abide by the Constitution.
You can see how this bureaucratic, wonky answer you keep giving, right? You're claiming to be an outsider that says you're going to shake things up, but you're giving the most wonky answers. I just want to hear that when you hold up your hand, like many of us have done in this room, to put themselves in harm's way, that you're going to protect and defend the Constitution as interpreted by the people who are in a position to interpret it, like our Supreme Court.
Yeah. I mean, the evasiveness is it's just extraordinary. She was terrific. It was so refreshing to see these members really diving into this issue, which, like, as you mentioned, Alex, impoundment is a word that most Americans have never, ever heard, but what it means is, where the money goes, who controls where the money goes. And Congress has been very specific in its budgets about where money goes, and only sometimes is it discretionary. And yet Vought and Paoletta are trying to basically take that power to themselves, along with Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, to claim that they get to basically redirect our money to whatever they want, not what the people's representatives want. And so it really is extraordinary. Like you said, our heads are going to be just so many times, but it's so important. And the work that Court Accountability has done, the impoundment issue brief that's on the site, it's so important. I hope people have a chance to read it, because it's going to be talked about over and over in the days ahead. And I do really fear, as you mentioned, with the insider relationship that some of them have with Clarence Thomas, that they may think that they have the votes to overturn, centuries of precedent. Because this Supreme Court by Roberts has been so out of control. But as of right now, the law of the land is against them, is against Russell Vought and his team on this. So back to you, Alex, I guess, to help close us out.
Yeah, and clearly they just don't feel constrained by anything. So it's up to us to constrain them. We're not the only ones focused on this. Lots of our allies in the advocacy ecosystem are super engaged. Really encourage you to reach out and get in touch with, connected to the work they're doing. Indivisible, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Center for American Progress, Public Citizen. So many terrific groups are super engaged on this. And it's imperative that in this moment, and they're going to try to steamroll these nominees through, right? They're going to break more norms in the Senate to get these guys confirmed as quickly as they can before the backlash begins. And we need to make sure senators are getting phone calls, emails. Pick up those phones. Make sure your representatives hear from you on this stuff. Your senators hear from you on this stuff, because it matters so much to all of our lives. Thanks so much, Lisa, for taking the time. We'll see you guys next time. Legal AF with Court Accountability Action, up to 400,000 plus subscribers. It is great to be with you, as always.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel, where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.